My husband cheated on me when I was feeling low and depressed and wanted to share my inheritance when my father died. I told him he was getting nothing but a divorce. I, 30F, need to get this off my chest because I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of emotions and I don't know how to stay afloat anymore. My life has turned upside down in the past 6 months, and I'm struggling to make sense of it all. 6 months ago, I lost my mom to cancer. She was more than just my mother. She was my best friend, my confidant, and my biggest supporter. Losing her has left a void in my life that I don't think can ever be filled. We were incredibly close, and thinking about our relationship now brings both smiles and tears. I remember when I was little, Mom would always make time for me, no matter how busy she was. She'd sit with me for hours, helping me with my homework, listening to my silly stories, and offering advice on everything from dealing with bullies to choosing what to wear for picture day. As I grew older, our bond only strengthened. During my college years, Mom was my rock. I struggled with a particularly difficult course in my second year, and I was close to giving up. Mom would stay up late with me on the phone, encouraging me and helping me study. She even learned some of the material herself, so she could quiz me. Her unwavering belief in me gave me the strength to push through, and I ended up acing that course. On my graduation day, Mom surprised me by flying out to attend the ceremony. She hadn't told me she was coming, saying she couldn't make it due to work commitments. But there she was, standing in the crowd with a huge homemade banner that read, "That's my girl." It was embarrassing and wonderful all at the same time. That's just who Mom was. She went all out to show her love and support. When I landed my first job after college, I was a nervous wreck before the interview. Mom spent hours helping me pick out the perfect outfit, then did mock interviews with me until I felt confident. She even drove me to the interview and waited outside in the car, giving me a big thumbs up as I walked in. When I got the job, she was the first person I called, and her excited scream probably deafened me for life. My parents were quite well off, and I'm their only child. They always made sure I had everything I needed, but they also taught me the value of hard work and kindness. Mom, in particular, was always involved in various charities and community projects. She'd often take me along, instilling in me a sense of social responsibility from a young age. 3 years ago, our family dynamic changed dramatically when Dad had an accident that left him wheelchair-bound. It was a difficult adjustment for all of us, but especially for Mom. She took on the role of Dad's primary caregiver, all while continuing to run her own business from home. I tried to help as much as I could, visiting often and taking care of household chores. Then, about a year and a half ago, Mom was diagnosed with cancer. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. How could this happen to my vibrant, energetic mother, the woman who had always been there for everyone else? It didn't seem fair. From that moment on, my life revolved around Mom's care. Dad took care of the financial aspects of her treatment, but I was the one who accompanied her to every doctor's appointment, every chemo session. I'd sit with her for hours during treatments, holding her hand when the nausea hit, reading to her when she felt too weak to hold a book. At home, I helped her manage the side effects of chemo. I learned to cook her favorite foods in ways that wouldn't upset her stomach. I'd brush her hair gently when it started falling out, and I went with her to choose a wig when she decided she wanted one. Through it all, Mom remained strong and positive. Even on her worst days, she'd smile and tell me how proud she was of me, how strong I was. Those moments meant everything to me. My job suffered as a result of my frequent absences. I was a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm, and while my boss was initially understanding, the constant time off began to take its toll. Projects were delayed, clients were unhappy, and my colleagues had to pick up my slack. I felt guilty, but I couldn't bring myself to prioritize work over Mom's care. Last month, I was called into a meeting with HR and my boss. They explained that due to my frequent absences and drop in performance, they had to let me go. I was devastated, but part of me was almost relieved. At least now I could focus entirely on Mom without the added stress of work. But then, 2 weeks after losing my job, Mom passed away. The pain was, and still is, indescribable. It felt like a part of me had been ripped away. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every corner of the house held a memory of her, and it was overwhelming. I kept expecting to hear her laugh, to smell her perfume, to see her walk through the door with her bright smile. The reality that she was gone forever was too much to bear. Throughout all of this, my husband Lucas, 32M, wasn't very supportive. He was always busy with work, barely helping out at home or offering emotional support. I tried to understand. His job as a financial analyst was demanding after all. But looking back, I realized how absent he really was during one of the hardest periods of my life. When Mom was first diagnosed, Lucas promised he'd be there for me. He said we'd face this together. But as the months wore on, he became more and more distant. He'd come home late from work, barely acknowledging me or asking about Mom. When I tried to talk to him about my fears and worries, he'd brush me off, saying he was too tired or had an important presentation to prepare for. During Mom's final weeks, Lucas was practically a ghost in our home. He'd leave for work before I woke up and return long after I'd gone to bed. On the rare occasions when he was home, he was always on his phone or laptop, claiming he had urgent work to finish. I felt so alone during a time when I needed support the most. After Mom passed, Lucas tried to comfort me, but it felt hollow somehow, like he was going through the motions without really understanding or sharing my pain. He attended the funeral, stood by my side as I greeted mourners, but there was a disconnect. It felt like we were strangers playing the roles of a grieving couple rather than actual partners supporting each other through a difficult time. Since Mom's death, I've been struggling with depression. Some days, I can barely get out of bed. The house feels so empty without Mom's frequent visits, and I keep expecting to hear her voice or see her walk through the door. I've lost interest in things I used to enjoy, and I find myself crying at random moments throughout the day. The grief comes in waves, sometimes leaving me gasping for air, other times numbing me to everything around me. Lucas has been acting weird lately. He's been working late more often, always on his phone, and just generally distant. I tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed me off, saying work was just busy. I wanted to believe him, to think that maybe he was just giving me space to grieve, but something felt off. Then, this morning, everything fell apart. Lucas was in the shower, and his phone kept buzzing on the nightstand. I glanced over and saw a message preview with heart emojis. My stomach dropped. I know I shouldn't have, but I picked up his phone and opened the messages. What I found shattered my world even further. Lucas has been having an affair with a colleague at work. The messages went back months, even before Mom died. While I was caring for my dying mother, grieving her loss, and struggling with depression, my husband was sneaking around behind my back. The messages were full of intimate details, plans for secret meetings, declarations of love. It made me sick to my stomach. How could he do this? How could he betray me when I needed him most? When Lucas got out of the shower, I confronted him. We had a huge fight. I screamed, I cried, I threw things. How could he do this to me when I was already at my lowest point? How long had this been going on? Did our marriage mean nothing to him? Lucas tried to explain, saying it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. He claimed he was lonely and stressed, that he didn't know how to deal with my grief. But I couldn't hear it. All I could think about was how he'd betrayed me, how he'd abandoned me when I needed him most. In the heat of the moment, I told Lucas to leave. The house is mine anyway. My parents helped with the down payment when we bought it. Lucas tried to argue, but I was firm. I couldn't bear to look at him, let alone share a space with him. So now, here I am, alone in my house, feeling more lost and betrayed than I ever have before. I've lost my mom, my job, and now my marriage in the span of 6 months. I don't know how to move forward from here. I'm angry, I'm hurt, and I'm scared of what the future holds. I guess I'm looking for advice, support, or just a listening ear. Has anyone been through something similar? How did you cope? How do you rebuild your life when it feels like everything has fallen apart? How do you trust again after such a deep betrayal? Update 1. It's been a month since I asked Lucas to move out, and so much has happened. I wanted to update you all and thank you for your incredible support on my last post. Your kind words and advice have been a lifeline during this turbulent time. First, I think I need to give you some more background on Lucas and our relationship. We met through a mutual friend, Sarah, about 5 years ago. Sarah had invited me to a house party she was throwing, and that's where I first saw Lucas. He was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked for hours that night, and I left feeling like I'd met someone special. What I didn't know then, but found out later, was that Lucas had actually seen me at a previous party a few weeks earlier. He'd been pestering Sarah to set up a meeting ever since. At the time, I thought it was romantic, the idea that he'd been so taken with me that he'd gone to such lengths to meet me. Now, looking back, I see it as the first red flag I missed. It speaks to a certain level of persistence, or perhaps obsession, that makes me uncomfortable in hindsight. The early days of our relationship were a whirlwind. Lucas was attentive, always showering me with compliments and grand gestures. He'd surprise me with flowers at work, plan elaborate dates, and seem to anticipate my every need. I felt cherished, special. But there were signs even then that things weren't quite right. Lucas could be possessive. He'd get upset if I spent too much time with friends, especially male friends. He'd make comments about my clothes, suggesting that certain outfits were too revealing for work or social outings. At the time, I brushed it off as him being protective or old-fashioned. I didn't see how he was slowly isolating me, controlling me. He was also subtly critical. He'd make offhand comments about my career choices, suggesting that I should be aiming higher or working harder. He'd compare me to his ex-girlfriends or female colleagues, always in a way that made me feel slightly inadequate. Again, I didn't recognize these as red flags at the time. I thought he was pushing me to be my best self, not realizing how these comments were eroding my self-esteem. When we got engaged after 2 years of dating, I thought it was the happiest day of my life. Lucas proposed in a very public way, at a basketball game, with the proposal displayed on the big screen. Everyone cheered, and I said yes without hesitation. It was only later that I realized he'd never actually asked me what kind of proposal I'd want. He'd assumed I'd want something big and showy, without considering that I might have preferred something more intimate. Our wedding was similar, big, flashy, and expensive. Lucas insisted on inviting everyone he knew, turning what I'd hoped would be a small personal ceremony into a huge event. I went along with it, telling myself that it was our day, not just mine, and that compromise was part of marriage. I thought things would get better after we got married. I thought we'd grow together, support each other, build a life as true partners. But instead, Lucas became more distant, more selfish. He'd spend long hours at work, come home late, and be too tired to engage in any meaningful conversation. When I'd try to talk about our future, about buying a house, having kids, he'd brush me off, saying we had plenty of time for that later. When Mom was diagnosed with cancer, I expected Lucas to step up, to be the supportive husband I needed. But he was nowhere to be found. When I was juggling my job and taking Mom for her checkups and chemo sessions, Lucas always had an excuse. Work was busy, he had an important meeting, he was too tired. I made excuses for him, told myself he was just stressed. Now I know he was just pretending to be busy while he carried on his affair. The past month has been a whirlwind of emotions. I've gone from anger to sadness to numbness and back again. I've had moments where I missed Lucas so much it physically hurt, followed by moments of rage where I wanted to burn everything he ever gave me. I've questioned every moment of our relationship, wondering if any of it was real, if he ever truly loved me. But just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. 2 weeks ago, my dad passed away from a sudden heart attack. The shock and grief hit me like a truck. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the world was closing in on me. I had just lost Mom, and now Dad was gone too. I was truly alone. Dad and I had always been close, but we'd grown even closer after Mom's diagnosis. He'd been my rock, my voice of reason when things got tough. Even from his wheelchair, he'd been a source of strength, always ready with a word of encouragement or a bad joke to make me smile. Losing him so suddenly, so soon after Mom, felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke on me. Arranging the funeral was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Some of my friends and relatives stepped up to help, which I'm incredibly grateful for. Sarah, the friend who had introduced me to Lucas, was particularly supportive. She took time off work to help me with the arrangements, stayed with me at night so I wouldn't be alone, and ran interference with well-meaning but overwhelming relatives. I was in a daze throughout the whole process, going through the motions, barely able to process what was happening. I remember standing at the funeral, greeting mourners, accepting condolences, but it all felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. Lucas showed up at the funeral. I saw him from across the room, looking somber in a dark suit. For a moment, I felt a pang of longing, a wish that things could be different, that he could be the supportive husband I needed. Right now. But then I remembered his betrayal, and the feeling turned to anger and disgust. Some of my family members approached me during the wake, telling me that maybe now was the time to forgive Lucas, to let him back in. They said I needed someone now that both my parents were gone. My Aunt Maria was particularly insistent, saying that everyone deserves a second chance and that Lucas seemed genuinely remorseful. But I couldn't do it. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. I couldn't forget how he'd abandoned me during Mom's illness, how he'd been cheating on me while I was grieving. The thought of letting him back into my life made me feel physically ill. It turns out Lucas had been talking to my friends and family, trying to get them to convince me to take him back. He was painting himself as the concerned husband, worried about his grieving wife. The thought of it made me sick. How dare he use my parents' deaths as a way to worm his way back into my life? My Aunt Liz, Dad's sister, pulled me aside during the wake. She's always been the straight shooter in the family, the one who tells it like it is. She told me to be careful, that she'd heard rumors that Lucas was now after my inheritance. With both my parents gone, I'm set to inherit everything. It's a substantial amount. Property, investments, savings. My aunt warned me that Lucas might try to worm his way back into my life to get his hands on the money. I thanked her for the warning, assuring her that I'd be careful. And sure enough, a few days after the funeral, Lucas showed up at the house. He was all apologies and tears, begging for forgiveness, saying he'd made a horrible mistake and that he wanted to be there for me now. He talked about how much he missed me, how empty his life was without me, how he'd do anything to make things right. For a moment, I almost believed him. A part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to fall into his arms and let him comfort me. But then I remembered my aunt's warning, and I decided to test his intentions. I brought up the inheritance. I told him I was overwhelmed by it all, that I didn't know what to do with such a large sum of money and so much property. I said I was considering selling everything and donating the money to charity, just to be rid of the responsibility. Lucas's eyes lit up in a way that made my skin crawl. He quickly suggested that we could divide the inheritance between us, that he could help me manage it all. He started talking about investments and financial planning, his voice growing more animated by the second. It was like he'd forgotten he was supposed to be comforting his grieving wife. That was all I needed to hear. I looked him straight in the eye and told him he wasn't getting a cent of my inheritance. The only thing he was getting was divorce papers. The look of shock on his face was almost comical. He spluttered, tried to backtrack, saying that's not what he meant, that he only wanted to help. But I stood firm. I told him to leave and not come back unless it was through a lawyer. After he left, I broke down. Not because I missed him or wanted him back, but because I finally saw clearly how much of our relationship had been a lie. How he'd never truly loved me, how he'd been using me all along. I cried for the years I'd wasted, for the love I thought I had, for the future I'd planned that would never come to be. The next day, I called a divorce lawyer and started the proceedings. I'm determined to protect myself and my inheritance. Lucas tried to contest it, claiming he deserved half of everything because we were married. But thankfully, my parents had insisted on a prenup when we got married. At the time, I thought it was unnecessary, but now I'm incredibly grateful for their foresight. These past few weeks have been a roller coaster. I'm grieving for my parents, angry at Lucas, scared about the future, but I'm also starting to feel a glimmer of hope. For the first time in a long time, I'm making decisions for myself, not trying to please anyone else. I've started seeing a therapist to help me process everything. It's hard, but I think it's helping. We're working through my grief for my parents, my anger at Lucas, and my fears about the future. She's helping me see patterns in my past relationships and teaching me how to set healthy boundaries. I'm also thinking about what I want to do next. Maybe start a business, maybe go back to school. For the first time in years, the future feels open, full of possibilities instead of obligations. I'm scared, but also excited. I'm rediscovering parts of myself that I'd lost during my marriage to Lucas. My friend Sarah has been an incredible support through all of this. She's apologized countless times for introducing me to Lucas, even though I've told her it's not her fault. She's been staying with me a few nights a week, helping me sort through my parents' belongings and just being there when I need to talk or cry. I'm also reconnecting with old friends that I'd lost touch with during my marriage. It's been eye-opening to hear their perspectives on my relationship with Lucas. Many of them say they had concerns but didn't know how to bring them up. It's made me realize how isolated I'd become. The divorce proceedings are ongoing, and it's stressful. Lucas is fighting for every penny he can get, dragging things out as much as possible. But I'm standing my ground. I've realized that I'm stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. Thank you all again for your support. It means more than you know. Your kind words and advice have been a source of strength during this difficult time. I'll update again when the divorce is finalized. Update 2. Hello, everyone. It's been 4 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some positive news with you all. First and foremost, the divorce is final. It wasn't easy. Lucas tried to drag it out to contest the prenup, to claim he deserved more. He even tried to argue that he'd contributed to my parents' care, which was a blatant lie. But in the end, the law was on my side. The prenup held up, and Lucas left with nothing more than what he came into the marriage with. It was a relief to sign those final papers and close that chapter of my life for good. As for the inheritance, it's all been settled. I'm now the sole heir to my parents' wealth and property. It's a bittersweet feeling. I'd give it all up in a heartbeat if it meant having my parents back. But I'm determined to use it in a way that would make them proud. Which brings me to my exciting news. I've started a small business. It's something I've always dreamed of doing, but never had the courage or the capital to pursue. It's a boutique marketing agency focusing on helping small local businesses improve their online presence. We're only a month in, but things are going really well so far. We've already landed several clients, and the feedback has been fantastic. Running my own business is challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. For the first time in a long time, I feel excited to wake up in the morning. I'm using the skills I've developed over the years, but in a way that feels meaningful and impactful. Plus, being my own boss means I can set my own schedule and priorities. I've also started a scholarship fund in my parents' names at the local community college. It's aimed at helping single parents who want to further their education. It feels good to be able to help others and honor my parents' memory at the same time. Emotionally, I'm in a much better place. The grief for my parents is still there. I don't think it will ever fully go away, but it's no longer all-consuming. I can think about them now and smile at the good memories instead of just feeling pain. The therapy has been incredibly helpful in processing everything that's happened and in rebuilding my self-esteem after Lucas's betrayal. I've also started volunteering at a local animal shelter on weekends. It's been therapeutic to focus on caring for others, and I'm considering adopting a dog of my own soon. The unconditional love of an animal feels like exactly what I need right now. I won't say everything is perfect. There are still tough days, moments when the loneliness hits hard, or when I get overwhelmed by all the changes. But overall, I feel like I'm finally on the right path. I'm rediscovering who I am without the weight of a toxic relationship or the stress of caring for sick parents. To everyone who's been following my story and offering support, thank you. Your kind words and advice have been a lifeline during some of my darkest moments. I hope my story can offer some hope to others who might be going through similar struggles. It does get better, even when it feels impossible. I'm looking forward to this new chapter in my life. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about the future and what it might hold. Here's to new beginnings and second chances.